the son who left his father alone on a remote lighthouse. The father's actions made him regret. Someone once asked, "Why keep the light burning when no one's watching?" The old man replied, his voice gravelly like stones grinding in his throat, "Because someday, someone lost out there will need that light to find their way back." At the edge of a forgotten cape, so remote that even maps only sketched it in faint outlines, there stood a small town called Northwick Bay. No tourists, no malls, just wind, rocks, and the sea. It felt like the kind of place the world had forgotten. But each night, when the ocean turned black and swallowed the horizon, a faint glow flickered from atop a lonely gray stone tower. The lighthouse. And behind that light was a man, breathless after climbing 79 narrow, frozen steps, his hand trembling as he lit the lamp. His name was Nathan, 60 years old, silver hair cropped close, eyes clouded, but always searching the horizon. He wasn't a man of many words. No one asked him much either. He lived for two things: to keep the lighthouse burning and to raise his son. That son, Lucas, was 17, caught between teenage rebellion and a distant kind of love for his father. Most days, Lucas would sit on step 39, halfway up the tower, his back against the cold stone wall, staring at the sea with a far-off look in his eyes. And his father, as always, climbing, pushing through the wind, step after step, just to keep the light alive. Their family had manned this lighthouse for 3 generations. Nathan's father died in the storm, trying to shield the mirror lens from shattering. He once told Nathan, "If this light goes out, dozens of ships won't make it to shore, and dozens of sons will never hear their father's voice again." Every day, Nathan taught Lucas how to clean the lens, how to read the clouds, listen to the wind, and use the lamp to send rescue signals, how to speak without words, using only gestures. But Lucas didn't care. He just wanted to go out with his friends, fish in the open sea, feel free. One day, Lucas asked, "If no one needs the lighthouse anymore, would you still climb up there and light it?" Nathan didn't answer. He opened the heavy door, letting the freezing air rush in, and pointed toward the dark ocean. "What do you see?" "Nothing, exactly," he said. "That's why we keep the light on." Each morning, father and son shared the same breakfast: toast, milk, and eggs. Nathan would tell stories of ships the lighthouse had saved. To Lucas, they sounded like fairy tales. After breakfast, they would inspect the rotating mirror, oil the gears, and make sure the lights still worked. One time, Nathan slipped on step 73. His knee smashed into the floor, bleeding. He sat there, catching his breath, before climbing the last few steps. From below, Lucas shouted in panic. Nathan called down, "Light the lamp first." Lucas just stood there, fists clenched, wanting to say something, but he didn't. He sighed, helpless. Lately, the ocean wind had changed. The sky wasn't as blue as it used to be. Seagulls flew lower. Nathan began keeping a weather journal, his handwriting uneven and fading. He warned Lucas, "Get the storm shelter ready." But Lucas didn't listen. Lucas watched from the shore as his friends set out to sea, laughing and calling to one another. He turned to see his father, back hunched slightly, one hand gripping the railing, climbing the tower step by step. And at that exact moment, Lucas made his decision. One day, he would leave. Leave this place. Leave the stone tower. Leave the life where all you ever did was light a lamp for people who might never come. On top of the lighthouse, Nathan lit the lamp, just like he always did. But that night, wrapped in fog, he felt something. The light seemed dimmer, as if a quiet voice inside him was whispering a warning. A storm is coming. Lucas was no longer a boy clinging to his father's footsteps. He was 17, an age where the heart begins to crave the unknown, to dream of oceans it has never seen. His friends, the sons of fishermen, were free to go out to sea, chasing tuna, coming back with wild stories and pockets full of cash. They had the world out there. Lucas looked at his own life. Mornings spent climbing the tower to clean the glass. Afternoons logging tide levels. Evenings learning how to read atmospheric pressure and light a lamp that no one seemed to care about. His life felt trapped in a cold, endless loop. I don't want to climb that tower every day just to light a stupid lamp no one even looks at, Lucas had shouted one rainy afternoon. Nathan didn't answer. He quietly tied a rope to the tower rail, his weathered hands slow and steady. There was no anger in his eyes, only a deep, heavy sadness, like morning dew that never dries. "Some lights don't need to be seen," he finally said, his voice low. "But if they ever go out, someone somewhere will never make it home." One rainy night, as Lucas lay in his tiny bunk, Nathan stood outside the doorway, speaking softly, almost as if to himself. "When I was a boy," he began, "your grandfather once took me out to sea in his old fishing boat. That night, the weather turned strange. The wind roared and dragged our boat far from shore. The old vessel couldn't hold against the sea's fury. Eventually, it broke apart. We clung to a piece of driftwood. 2 days we floated. No food, no hope. Then I saw it, that light. Like a voice calling me back to your mother, back to land. That light saved my life." Lucas didn't reply, but he remembered the way his father's eyes looked that night, like they held an entire ocean beneath a sky heavy with clouds. One afternoon, Lucas found his friends gathered near the docks. They were talking excitedly about their next fishing trip, longer, farther, more daring. One friend clapped Lucas on the back. "You really gonna stay stuck with that cold stone tower forever? Come to see, man, it's incredible." Lucas hesitated, but inside something shifted. That evening, at home, Lucas told his father, "I'm going out to sea with the others." Nathan didn't argue. He simply nodded and poured a glass of water, but the nod didn't feel like approval. It felt like surrender, like he had known this moment would come, just not this soon. That night, Nathan climbed the lighthouse alone, slower than usual. The lamp still lit up the night, but inside he felt hollow. On the day Lucas set out with the fishing crew, the sky was a strange kind of blue, too clear, almost eerie. Nathan watched from the cliff as high-altitude clouds raced across the sky, a silent warning of something darker. He lifted his binoculars, tracking the boat as it shrank into a tiny speck on the horizon. Then, it vanished. "The wind isn't howling," he muttered. "But the sea doesn't need wind to kill." He scrambled to write in his weather journal. His hands trembled, letters crooked and uneven. His heart was telling him something wasn't right. That night, the lighthouse burned bright. But Nathan didn't move for a long time. He sat silently beside the lamp, almost like he was speaking to the light itself, or praying, begging it to bring his son back home. The night before the storm finally hit, the town fell into a strange silence. Atop the stone tower, an old man was still adjusting the mirrors meticulously, as if preparing for something much bigger than weather. Somewhere far beyond the shore, a small boat drifted, off the map, beyond radio signals, past GPS, and out of the reach of any light. That morning, Lucas stepped out of the lighthouse door like waking from a long dream. For the first time, he left behind the narrow world of spinning lights, the endless rhythm of crashing waves, and the fading shadow of his father etched onto the stone steps every dusk. Slung over his shoulder was a small backpack. Inside, only a few changes of clothes, a folding knife his father gave him when he was 12, and an old lighter. Not much, but enough to begin the first journey of his life. He asked to join Joy's fishing boat, his childhood friend. The boat was old but sturdy, slicing the thin, sharp line across the sleepy sea like a blade through silk. The engine rumbled like a departure song. The men smoked, speaking in a kind of sea language Lucas had only heard through wind-blown windows. He tilted his head back, letting the first sunlight hit his face, salty, wild, alive. And for the first time in months, he smiled. "I'm finally living." Far behind him, Nathan stood on a rocky ledge beside the lighthouse, now dark for maintenance. He watched the horizon, where the boat had become a dot, then faded into the morning mist like a grain of light. He didn't wave. He just stood there, still and quiet. Because sometimes love doesn't live in goodbyes. Sometimes it lives in that one final look that never turns away. That night at sea felt like a dream. The fishermen opened bottles, sang songs. They told old tales of white whales, sea dragons, and islands that didn't exist on any map. Lucas felt like he'd stepped into a legend. He jumped down into the hold, helping Joy pull in nets. The air was thick with fish, sweat, and salt, but he had never felt so free. When the sky turned black, Lucas climbed to the top of the boat, laying on his back. Above him, stars wove across the sky like a mythical net. He flicked the old lighter his father gave him. The tiny flame trembled in the breeze. "I'll go even farther," he whispered. "I'll show Dad how beautiful the world out here really is. But the ocean doesn't only sing." On the third morning, the wind changed. A storm formed without warning. Waves rose like towering walls of water. Dark clouds dropped like a torn blanket, smothering the sea. The radio went dead. The signal lights blinked, then went dark. The boat spun, pulled toward the storm's eye like dust caught in a whirlpool. Joy gripped the wheel. Lucas tied the lifeline around his waist, heart pounding. The wind screamed like a voice weeping from the depths. Back at the lighthouse, Nathan sensed something was wrong. He restarted the rotating lamp, activating all emergency signals. But the light looked dim, like a candle against a hurricane. He called over the distress frequency. No one responded. A violent gust slammed open a window. Rain came in sideways. Still, he sat there, clutching the old radio, like a blind man listening for the sound of his child's footsteps in the storm. And then, silence. No signal came back. Out in the deep sea, the boat was still fighting alone, against endless waves that crashed with the fury of something ancient and angry. Radar failed, no signal. On the radio, the news began to report, several fishing boats are missing. Status of crew members, unknown. Nathan sat before the lighthouse lamp, his eyes wide and unblinking, as if praying to something only the sea could hear. The sea returned to its eerie calm after the raging storm. But inside the father's heart, a different kind of storm had just begun. He stood motionless at the top of the lighthouse, staring into the foggy emptiness. There were no more winds, no more crashing waves, but also no more signals from the boat that had carried his son. Only a silence so vast, it chilled the soul. They say loss is when hope disappears, but for him, the man who kept the lighthouse burning, hope was the only thing left. He begged to join the rescue crews, following every trace of waves, every drifting plank of wood. Sometimes he stayed awake 3 nights in a row, eyes locked on rescue radar screens he didn't even understand, just to catch a single flicker, a strange pulse, any sign in the sea. He wrote handwritten letters to every coastal outpost, describing his son, his name, his face, pleading with anyone who might have seen something, anything, to call the lighthouse. Once, A captain reported spotting a red shirt floating in the ocean, same color as the one his son wore that day. He rushed to the scene, only to find a torn, unfamiliar piece of clothing. Another fragile hope, crushed without mercy. Still, every night, he climbed the tower to light the beacon. Not a single day passed that he forgot. The villagers said he was crazy. "There's no need for a lighthouse anymore," they'd whisper. "Ships have GPS now, flashing LED signals. It's the modern world." But he kept lighting it, not for the ships, for his son. If the boy is still alive, he'll find his way home by the light his father never stopped keeping. And if he's not, then let that light be the candle that carries his soul back to the sea. He never said that to anyone. He only whispered it to himself each night, beneath the howling wind and the lonely glow atop the stone tower. One night, under a pale moon and a land-bound breeze, he heard something. A bamboo flute, faint, drifting in from far out at sea. The melody was familiar, achingly familiar. It was the tune they used to play together at sunset. The Seagull's Lullaby, a piece his son had named himself. The flute's notes were broken, scattered like coming from somewhere impossibly distant. And then, they were gone. He stood upright, his hands trembling. That sound, it wasn't a memory. It was real. And in that moment, he knew. Somewhere out there, the boy was still alive, or at least, a part of his spirit hadn't yet left this world. The father, older now, more hunched, eyes deeper than before, still climbed the tower every single night. The lighthouse was no longer just a tool for navigation. It had become his heart burning with the love for a son who hadn't come home. On windless days, the ocean is not peaceful. It is a silence that suffocates. On a small boat adrift in the vast open sea, with no direction, no signal, and no promises from the sky. The remaining crew floated helplessly, swallowed by the endless blue. It had been 7 days since the ship lost contact with land. The waves were no longer violent, but that eerie stillness made the boat feel like a drifting tomb in the middle of the ocean. The food was gone. The last pieces of bread, hard as stone, were broken into crumbs and shared quietly. No one fought. No one spoke. Just a circle of silent kindness in the depths of desperation. Fresh water had run out the day before. They tried filtering seawater through their shirts, but the salt still burned their throats. Their mouths were dry, lips cracked, and their bodies slowly dissolving under the salt-heavy air. Even the seasoned fishermen, men forged by wind and storm, were starting to fade. Some drifted into unconsciousness, whispering their mothers' names. Others sat in silence for hours, eyes glazed over like the sea itself. The boy, now thinner than ever, sometimes whispered in his half-conscious state, "Dad, Dad," as if saying it out loud was the only thread keeping him alive. By the 8th day, the sky began to shift. A sudden rainstorm swept over, not strong, but enough to bring the first drops of water. They rejoiced like madmen, cupping their hands, using torn cloth, rusty cans catching every drop they could. It wasn't just water falling, it was life. The boys sobbed, uncontrollably, the first sound after days of silence and moaning. Those weren't just raindrops. They were grace. But the storm passed as quickly as it came. The sun blazed overhead again, and the boat drifted with no end in sight. They had no idea where they were. The sea gave no clues. The sky felt like a sealed dome, no way out, no way forward. The strongest of them began to collapse, sunken eyes, cracked lips, bodies trembling from thirst and cold. The boy, frail and inexperienced, still fought to stay awake, still clung to hope. And every time he passed out from exhaustion, he dreamed of the lighthouse. Not the real one, but a memory. A flicker in the dark, wrapped in a whisper. "Dad, "Don't turn off the light. I'm almost home." On the evening of the 9th day, just when it seemed all hope had faded, the boy, barely conscious, murmured, "The lighthouse." He wasn't mistaken. That was a lighthouse beam. No one shouted. No one had the strength, but their eyes lit up. Bodies that had nearly given in stirred again. With what little they had left, they fashioned a makeshift paddle. One man used his hands. Another hung his leg over the side, pushing against the water, blood streaming from his foot into the sea. This wasn't effort anymore. This was a fight for their lives. The beam of the lighthouse flickered, vanished, then reappeared, teasing, but guiding. The night deepened, the ocean darkened. But that light kept them from losing their way. It wasn't just a signal. It was an anchor for their will to survive. It was a whisper from lost souls, a mother's hand, a father's promise. It was love and the primal hunger to live. Half a day later, they reached an unfamiliar shore. Strange language, unknown faces, men who looked like they had just crawled out of hell. No one cried. No one laughed. Only the boy, his eyes cloudy, could still recognize one thing. At this port, there was a lighthouse. Not as tall as his father's, but its light had saved him. The locals, citizens of a distant land, asked no questions. They took the weakened men to a nearby clinic, stopped the bleeding, fed them warm broth, gave them fresh water. The boy, for the first time in days, slept in a real bed with clean white sheets. A few days later, he boarded a ship bound for home. No one could believe they were alive. That island had been hundreds of nautical miles off course, far beyond commercial routes. Yet some miracle brought them to the one place with light. And that light, thought to be just a beam from a tower, became something more. A symbol of belief, of survival, and of a father's love unshaken by the wildest sea. Light doesn't just guide ships, it guides hearts, especially those fighting through the fog of fear, the waves of despair, towards something, anything, like home. The sun hadn't yet risen, but the first light of dawn had already touched the moss-covered rooftops along the coastal village he once called home. The sun had returned. It was still the same path, an old trail lined with gravel cutting through the red earth, weaving along sun-scorched hills where the dry grass had faded into the color of memory. But today, his steps were different, slower, more deliberate, as if he were walking into some sacred ritual of life. And then there it was. The lighthouse stood tall, weathered, eternal, like an ancient monument carved between sea and sky. For years, he had seen it as nothing more than an object, a dull repetition of his father's life. But today, it appeared as something else entirely. A symbol, a landmark, a vessel holding the light of the soul. His father, thinner now, hair grayer, steps slower, was waiting. But his eyes hadn't changed. Still clear, still steady. Just like the last time the sun had seen them. Lit from behind by the lamp's glow shining through the little window, revealing every strong, warm line on his father's face. They didn't speak. They just looked at each other. A gaze that lingered, heavy, trembling, carrying the weight of the ocean between them. Then the son stepped forward, dropped to his knees, and wrapped his arms around his father like no time had ever passed. "Dad, ... he whispered, his chest heaving like waves crashing into rock. "I'm sorry. Thank you, for the light, for the silence, for everything." His voice didn't come from his throat. It came from somewhere deeper, somewhere soul deep. Not the voice of the proud young man who once walked away, but of someone who had survived the storm and finally understood. Some things, quiet as they may be, never stopped guiding you home. The father said nothing, but his trembling fingers gently touched his son's hair, now dusted with a few strands of gray. A soft stroke. Then a nod, the same way he had always nodded, at the light, at the sea, at the wind, and now at the sun who would take his place. The next morning, before the sun had pushed through the salted mist, the son woke early. No voice called him. No hand shook him awake. He rose on his own, pulled on his father's heavy, worn coat, put on the old, faded knit cap. His boots, slightly too big, scraped and echoed as he stepped onto the stone stairs. For the first time in his life, he climbed all 79 steps. Each footstep echoed through the tower's hollow core like a bell ringing through time. The wind sliced through the cracks in the stone, howling in bursts. Cold air slapped his face, crept down his spine, like it was stripping him bare, exposing the illusions and arrogance of his younger self. At the 50th step, he stopped, panting. He had once thought this job was simple. Just twist the light, climb up, climb down, done. But now, each step felt like a silent prayer. Finally, he reached the top. The small room was just as it had always been. The rotating beacon, the thick lenses, the worn electric wires, and the old logbook, yellowed with time. He flipped to a page and read, March 15th, strong winds, high waves. But the light stayed on. March 17th, slight misalignment in the lamp, adjusted. March 20th, my son left. That last line hit like a blade. He clenched his fist, lifted his gaze toward the sea. The waves were gentle now, brushing the shore like scripture being read aloud. Each ripple was a word, each swell, a lesson. And only now was he still enough to listen. He lit the lamp. The beacon turned. The light rose soft, steady, like a small miracle blooming in the heart of the ocean. And in that moment, he understood. Keeping the light wasn't just a job. It was a calling, a legacy, a form of faith. He was no longer the son who used to argue with his father. He stood beside him now, checking the wiring, oiling the gears, wiping the lenses. No complaints, no questions. He finally understood. It was in the silence that the flame endured. One night, he asked his father, "Dad, did you ever feel lonely?" The old man smiled faintly, his eyes drifting out to the dark sea. "Yes, but it was in those moments I felt closest to the light." The son didn't reply. He sat there in silence for a long time, letting the words sink in. He understood now, in loneliness, the light became clearer. In silence, the heart finally spoke. He remembered every argument, every time he had stormed off, believing the world out there was bigger than this little tower. But now he knew nothing is bigger than a father's heart. As the days passed, his father grew weaker. He no longer climbed the tower, only sat at its base, eyes always turned upward, watching his son climb, step by step. One afternoon, the old man coughed, and the son rushed to hold him. The father simply smiled and whispered, "You're the keeper now." The son took his hand. For the first time, he wasn't afraid of the weight that came with it. He knew now. Growing up doesn't mean achieving more. It means standing where someone once stood for you, and keeping the fire alive. One stormy day, a report came in, a fishing boat stranded offshore. He didn't wait for instructions. He climbed the tower early, increased the light's intensity, adjusted the angle. The beam sliced through the thick rain like a sword of light. When the boat finally returned safely, a little boy stood on deck, pointed up, and shouted, "That light, it saved my dad." The keeper looked down and saw himself, and something warm rose inside him. His father passed away on a calm, quiet day. There was no grand funeral, just an ordinary evening where the sun lit the lamp. But this time, he knew. This light wasn't just guiding sailors, it was saying goodbye to the man who had passed everything down through silence, through devotion, through quiet belief. At the top of the tower, the son placed a wooden sign, carved by hand. The keeper, the father, the guide. That night, he lit the lamp. The light turned. It didn't flicker. It didn't fade. As if no one had ever left. The winter sea roared, as it always did. Wind whipped across the cliffs, pounding against the lighthouse tower like echoes of voices from a time long past. At the top of the lighthouse, the beacon kept turning, silently sweeping across the waves, like the quiet heartbeat of the ocean. The father, the lighthouse keeper for decades, was gone. He passed on a misty April morning, when fog still clung to the rooftop and the distant church bells rang like a soft farewell. No cries, no dramatic tears. The son simply knelt before the still burning light, lit an incense stick the wind couldn't hold, and whispered, "I understand now." The son had become the keeper. The house his father left behind still sat on the old hillside, where the sea spoke at the edge of the horizon and the scent of salt floated on the breeze. Each morning he rose early, brewed a pot of tea the same way his father did, gazed out at the sea, just as he remembered his father standing by the window, silent, staring out to something always just out of reach. At dusk, he brought the oil, checked the lamp's wick, wiped down the lenses. What once seemed repetitive and meaningless had become a ritual, a breath from the past. He climbed all 79 steps every single day, no breaks, no excuses. Even when the rain lashed down, winds howled, or thunder rolled, he climbed, just as his father had. At first, his legs ached, his back protested, but over time, the pain faded. And in each step, he began to see the stages of his father's life. The first steps, youth, eager, reckless. The middle ones, endurance, quiet sacrifices made without applause. The final steps, weariness, but never surrender. He wasn't just climbing a tower. He was climbing through memory, through time, through the slow unfolding of the soul. And every time he reached the top and looked out to sea, it felt like standing between two worlds, one outside full of storms, and one inside, silent but infinite. Then his son grew up, just like he once did. One day, the boy asked, "Dad, why do you do this?" He smiled, didn't answer right away. Just like his father once did. That summer, he took the boy up the tower. Let him feel each stone step underfoot. Let his fingers brush the cold rail, worn smooth by time. Pointing toward the horizon, he said, "You see that? That's where the light has to reach first. No matter the rain, no matter the storm, people out there need to know which way to go." The boy said nothing, but in his eyes there was something. A flicker, like the start of a promise that hadn't yet found its words. No one is truly gone, as long as they're remembered. The father, though laid to rest, still lived on. In the way the son wiped the glass with a dry cloth. In the habit of tapping the wood frame 3 times before the climb. In the way he sipped tea each dawn. Some nights, the son dreamt of his father, standing on the last step, arm outstretched, pointing toward the edge of the world. "It wasn't the light from the lamp I was guarding," he'd say. "It was the light in your heart." He'd wake with a tightness in his chest, but also a warmth he hadn't felt in years. Years later, strangers began to visit the island just to say thank you. Some were ship captains. Others had once lost their way in a raging storm until they saw the light. They said, "If it hadn't been for that beam, we might not have made it." He never took the praise, just bowed his head, because he knew the light wasn't his alone. It was the legacy of many, a long chain of silent devotion. That light, it didn't belong to a single person. It was a symbol of faith, of compassion, a guide not just for ships, but for souls drifting through the storms of life. One moonless night, he stood atop the lighthouse. The sea was unusually calm. As if it too was listening, he slowly turned the lamp. Its light swept the sea steady, silent, unwavering. Far off at the horizon, something moved a speck in the distance. Maybe a boat, maybe just a wave. But it didn't matter. What mattered was this. The light was still shining, still strong, still there. And in that quiet moment, his heart glowed the same way, not for others to see, but because sometimes one keeper is enough. Then one morning, his boy, without a word, without being asked, climbed 79 steps on his own. At the 50th step, he paused, turned around, looked down at his father, and smiled. No one holds the light forever, but if someone once held it with all their heart, that light will never fade. The lighthouse is a symbol, but the human heart, that's the true source of light. We live not just to light the path for ourselves, but to keep a spark of hope alive for someone out there, even if we'll never know who they are. A father lights the flame, a son carries it on, then a grandchild, and so on. That light, it circles, it endures, forever alive in the quiet footsteps climbing 79 stairs of time. Thank you for listening to today's story. If something in it touched you, leave a comment, share your thoughts, or simply send this video to someone who might need a little gentle light in the middle of life's storms.